He looked me straight in the eyes and said the words that would ruin everything. "Don't worry, it's just a game." But the way he said it, the way his eyes lingered just a second too long across the flicker of candlelight, it didn't feel like a game. Not anymore. It started simple. A weekend get-together. Couples wine charcuterie boards, too much laughter. Our neighborhood had a tradition of hosting monthly adult game nights. It was harmless until it wasn't. That night, my husband was out of town for a business trip. It was rare he hated flying and rarely left me alone overnight. So when our neighbor Rachel invited me anyway, I hesitated. But she insisted. "It's just trivia and Cards Against Humanity," she said. "Don't sit home alone. We miss you." So I went. That was mistake number one. The group was smaller than usual, just Rachel and her husband, one newlywed couple from across the street, and then him, Liam. Rachel's brother-in-law, tall, disarming with that kind of smile that made you check your posture without realizing it. He'd just moved in temporarily, job change needed a place to stay. I'd seen him once before at a barbecue, but never really noticed him, until now. We played silly games for an hour, drinking too much cheap red wine and letting our guard down. Then Rachel pulled out a box wrapped in matte black. "Something new," she said, winking. "It's like Truth or Dare, but more fun." "Fun?" how someone asked. "It's called No Shame. It's spicy," she laughed. "But it's only a game, unless you make it more." She looked right at me when she said it. Cards were drawn. Questions were answered. Dares became flirtier. Tension climbed the walls like smoke. Then it was my turn. I drew a card and read it aloud. "Kiss the person in the room who makes you the most curious." The room erupted in laughter and ooze, but I froze, because somehow all I could see across the room was Liam, and he was already standing. He walked toward me, slowly, playfully. "It's just a game," he said again, grinning. I should have laughed. I should have waved him off and said, "Nice try." But instead, I let him kiss me. Just a quick kiss, barely a brush of lips. But it stayed on me, even after I went home. Even after I locked the door. Even after I told myself I was imagining it. Because that kiss, it didn't feel like a game. It felt like an invitation. And I was already at the door. I told myself the next morning that it didn't mean anything. That it was just wine. Just adrenaline. Just a dare in a dimly lit room full of married couples pretending to be edgy for a night. But my body didn't believe me. Neither did my phone. Because there it was a message from a number I didn't recognize. Liam's still just a game. I should have deleted it. I should have blocked the number. I should have told Rachel to tell her brother-in-law to back off. But I didn't. Instead, I stared at those 4 words until my coffee went cold. Still just a game. No punctuation, just suggestion. I didn't respond. But I didn't forget. The days that followed were quiet. Too quiet. My husband returned late Sunday night and immediately started talking about how much he hated his hotel pillows. I nodded, asked about the conference, cooked his favorite pasta, and smiled when I didn't mean it. Because while he was away, something inside me had shifted. It wasn't love. It wasn't even lust yet. It was attention, recognition. A dangerous sense that I had awakened something in someone else. Because I didn't know how to wake it again in my own marriage. I saw Liam again 2 days later. It was innocent on the surface. I was walking the dog. He was outside Rachel's house working on his car. He saw me, wiped his hands, and walked up. "Hey," he said casual. "Didn't expect to see you out here." "This is my block," I answered awkward. "Where else would I be?" He laughed. Touché. Silence. Then, "You haven't answered my message." I stared at him. Because I didn't know what to say. "Want to know what I wanted you to say?" I didn't answer. He stepped closer. Too close. "I wanted you to say no. That it was just a game. That you felt nothing." Why would you want that? Because it would have made this a hell of a lot easier. I left before I could say anything more. Heart pounding. Hands shaking. And later that night when I told my husband I wasn't in the mood, he kissed my forehead and turned over. He didn't ask why. He didn't wonder what had changed. But I did. Because I wasn't the same woman who'd drawn that card. And deep down, I didn't want to be her again. It was raining the night the line disappeared. Not the kind of cinematic downpour that makes your heart race. No, it was a slow, insistent drizzle. The kind that soaks into your skin without you even noticing. I hadn't planned to see him. I was supposed to be dropping off a casserole for Rachel. She'd had minor surgery, and I was playing the good neighbor, the responsible wife, the helper. But Rachel wasn't home. Liam was. He opened the door in a t-shirt that clung to his chest, damp from the steam of cooking, or a shower, I wasn't sure. "She's not here," he said, holding the door open. "Went to her mom's for the night." "But I'll take that." He gestured to the casserole dish. I handed it to him. Our fingers touched. And that's when I should have left. That's when I should have smiled, said goodnight, walked back into the drizzle, and forgotten this alternate life that had started sketching itself around me. But I didn't leave. Instead, I stood there on the porch, like a woman who had forgotten how to choose right from wrong. "Do you want to come in for a minute?" he asked. "It's wet out here." I did. God help me, I walked through that door, knowing full well it would never feel like just a door again. The house smelled like garlic and something warm. The television was playing softly in the background, some rerun neither of us cared about. I sat on the edge of the couch. He poured wine. We didn't talk about the game. We didn't talk about my husband. We didn't even talk about what was about to happen. But we both knew. I looked down at the glass in my hand and then up at him. "This isn't who I am," I whispered. He didn't smile. He didn't tease. He just looked at me long, quiet, pained. Then tell me to stop. He was close now, kneeling, his hand resting on the cushion beside my knee. "Tell me to leave you alone." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Because somewhere deep inside, the part of me that once cried alone in the shower, that begged to be seen, to be heard, to be touched again in a way that felt human, that part didn't want him to stop. And so, I didn't say no. What happened next felt like the collapse of a dam. Years of silence, of brushing things under the rug, of telling myself this is what marriage becomes. All of it burst. We kissed, desperately, clumsily, like people who knew this might be the first and last time, but still couldn't stop themselves. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't romantic, it wasn't even tender. But it was real. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I felt like a woman again. Not just a wife. And afterward, when we lay there in the fading warmth, I didn't feel ashamed. Not yet. That came later. When I walked back into my house, crept into bed beside the man who had no idea he had just lost something he didn't even realize was slipping. He murmured in his sleep, reached for me out of habit. And I lay there, stiff silent, staring at the ceiling, wondering how something so small a game had become a secret I'd carry like a stone in my chest. The morning after was too quiet. It wasn't just the silence in the house, it was the silence inside me. The kind that hums just under the surface like a warning bell that never stops ringing. I moved through the kitchen like I always did. Poured coffee, scrambled eggs, set 2 plates. My husband walked in still groggy from sleep, rubbing his eyes. "You're up early," he mumbled. I smiled. I think I did. Couldn't sleep. Not technically a lie. I had barely slept curled on the very edge of the bed, wrapped in sheets that suddenly felt unfamiliar. He kissed my cheek on the way to the coffee pot. I didn't flinch, but I felt it how that one simple gesture made my stomach turn. Because now every touch felt like theft. And worse, he didn't know what had been stolen. I told myself it was just one mistake. A moment of weakness. It hadn't meant anything. It wasn't love. It was grief, maybe grief for the woman I used to be. For the passion I thought I'd never feel again. "It doesn't have to define you," I whispered to myself later, sitting alone in my car outside the grocery store. But the problem was, it already had. Because I couldn't stop thinking about Liam. His touch, his voice. The way he looked at me like I was more than just someone's wife. He texted me that afternoon. "Liam, you okay?" 3 words. And yet they echoed louder than anything my husband had said to me in weeks. I didn't answer. I stared at the message. I locked my phone. I unlocked it again. "I can't do this," I typed but didn't send. It was a mistake I typed next, then deleted. Finally, I settled on, "Me, please don't reach out again. We both know it can't happen again." He didn't reply. But he'd seen it. And the space that had opened between us, charged, electric, dangerous, suddenly snapped shut. I exhaled, relief, regret. I didn't know the difference anymore. That night, my husband and I had dinner with his brother and Rachel. Liam didn't say much. He barely looked at me. But I could feel it, the tension hanging in the air, like a wire pulled too tight. Rachel, oblivious, chattered about renovations. My husband and Liam talked about football politics, something safe. And I sat there smiling, nodding, playing my part. But every time our eyes met across the table, I felt like the room was shrinking. "You're awfully quiet tonight," Rachel teased me at one point. I laughed, just tired. Another lie? But that's what my life was becoming, wasn't it? A string of half-truths, of forced smiles, of moments where I pretended that nothing had changed when deep down everything had. Because even if Liam never touched me again, he had already taken something, and I had let him. Later, when my husband reached for me in bed, I let him. I didn't say no, but I also didn't feel anything. Not really, because my mind was somewhere else, haunted by what I'd done, and terrified by how easy it had been to do it. This wasn't just about one night. It was about all the nights that had come before, where I felt invisible, unheard, unwanted. And now this terrible truth. Once you let yourself be seen by someone else, it's almost impossible to unsee yourself through their eyes. Even if that someone is your husband's brother. 2 weeks passed. I avoided Liam as much as possible, not that it was hard. He stopped coming by unannounced, stopped texting, stopped doing anything that might hint at the connection we once shared. Still, I thought about him constantly. I thought about the look in his eyes that night. The way he whispered my name like it was something he wasn't supposed to say. The way I felt wanted alive, dangerous. But most of all, I thought about the silence that followed. Because sometimes silence speaks louder than anything else. It was a Sunday afternoon when the illusion finally shattered. We were hosting a family cookout. The usual suspects came: cousins, neighbors, old college friends. Liam arrived with Rachel, their matching polos, and fake grins, betraying nothing. He was good at pretending. So was I. But that afternoon, as I stood by the sink drying a wine glass and staring out the kitchen window, he walked in. No words. Just him, just me, and all the unsaid things between us. "You look tired," he said softly. I turned surprised by the gentle voice. He hadn't spoken directly to me since the text. "I've been sleeping," I lied. "Lying," he corrected with a ghost of a smile. I should have told him to leave. Instead, I froze. "We agreed," I whispered. "I didn't," he said, his voice low. "You did." His gaze dropped to the floor, then returned to mine. "Rachel's pregnant," he added after a beat. My breath caught. It wasn't jealousy, not entirely. It was displacement. As if what we had, however brief, however wrong, had been pushed even further into the shadows. Erased. Rewritten. And yet he was standing here, in my kitchen, telling me this. Why? Congratulations, I managed. It's not mine. The glass in my hand slipped and shattered in the sink. What? She cheated, months ago, before that night. I found out after. Never said anything. His words slammed into me like waves, over and over. Why are you telling me this? Because I don't want to be the only one carrying secrets. Silence stretched between us again. But this time, it wasn't the kind that buzzed with tension. It was the kind that suffocates. Later, I stood on the porch with my husband as the sun set, watching kids run through sprinklers and adults laugh over beers. I leaned my head against his shoulder. He kissed my temple. "You've been off lately," he murmured. "Everything okay?" I nodded. Another lie. But when I looked across the yard and saw Liam playing catch with my son, he glanced up and our eyes locked for just a second too long. He smiled. Not a friendly smile. A knowing one. The kind that says, you and I share something they'll never understand. And that was when I knew. No matter how far I ran from that night, no matter how many lies I told myself or others, one truth would always remain. He knew too much, and he'd taken too much. And part of me had let him. After the cookout, things didn't go back to normal. They couldn't. I tried God, I tried. I immersed myself in laundry, in PTA meetings, in grocery lists and podcasts and yoga classes I didn't even like. Anything to avoid thinking. Anything to drown out that look in Liam's eyes. But the harder I worked to erase it, the deeper it embedded itself. A few days later, I got a text from an unknown number. "You left your sunglasses in my truck that night. Want me to drop them off?" I stared at the message. A simple object, a plausible excuse. But we both knew it wasn't about the sunglasses. I didn't respond. Instead, I told myself to forget it. To focus on my marriage, my son, the life I had spent years building. One impulsive act didn't have to destroy it all. But secrets, they don't stay buried. Not when someone else holds a shovel. That Friday, I had to pick up my son from Liam's house. Rachel was out. My husband was working late. It was routine, innocent. But when I pulled up, Liam was on the porch, leaning against the railing like he'd been waiting for me. He didn't speak. He just held out a small velvet box. "What is that?" I asked, not moving. "Something I shouldn't give you," he said. "But I'm doing it anyway." Against my better judgment, I stepped forward. My fingers brushed his as I took the box. Inside was a silver necklace. Simple, elegant, and wrong. "I can't accept this," I said. "It's not a gift. It's an apology," he replied. "And maybe a reminder." Of what? Of what it felt like to be chosen? I froze. He stepped back, hands in his pockets. "No strings," he said. "I'll never bring it up again, I promise." "Liam, I'll keep your secret if you keep mine." The moment I got home, I locked the necklace in a drawer and tried to forget it. But every time I passed that drawer, I felt it whisper. Not loudly, just enough. Enough to remind me that someone else knew a version of me that no one else had ever seen. That weekend, my husband noticed something. "You've been quiet." "Yeah, just tired." "Is it me?" he asked gently. Did I do something? My throat tightened. "No, you've been wonderful," I said, hating myself a little. And he had. That was the worst part. He wasn't neglectful. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't distant. He loved me. He just didn't see me the way Liam had, messy, aching, vulnerable. And I didn't know if that made me a villain or just human. Later that night, I opened the drawer. The necklace still gleamed in the dark. I didn't put it on, but I didn't throw it away either. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Secrets don't stay buried. They wait. And sometimes, they sparkle. It started subtly, the way the necklace haunted me. I didn't wear it. I didn't dare. But its presence became like a phantom touch, soft, cold, persistent. I could feel it even when the drawer was closed, even when I was across the room folding towels or making dinner. Sometimes I'd catch myself reaching for it unconsciously. And sometimes I let myself, just to feel it between my fingers, just to remember what it was like to be wanted, not just needed. Liam kept his word on the surface. He didn't text, he didn't flirt, he didn't come near me at family events. But he was always there, helping my husband fix the garage door, tossing a football with my son in the yard, laughing with the neighbors like nothing had ever happened. And that made it worse. Because it had happened, and every smile he threw across the lawn, every polite nod in my direction, felt like a secret between us, a shared crime hidden in plain sight. One Saturday evening, my husband suggested we invite Liam over for dinner, just to say thanks for all the help he's given lately. I smiled tightly. Sure, why not? Because why not, right? Why not let the man who had kissed me in a dark room, who had given me a necklace I still hadn't told my husband about, why not let him sit at our table, carve chicken, and pour wine like a loyal friend? I watched Liam that night more carefully than I meant to. I noticed the way his eyes avoided mine just slightly too long, how his laugh was a bit louder than usual, and how his fingers brushed mine as he passed the salad bowl just a second too long. No one else noticed, but I did, because I wasn't just playing the hostess. I was watching the edge of the rules blur again. After dessert, the men moved to the living room. I stayed back in the kitchen, pretending to clean. Then I felt the pressure of eyes on my back. I turned, and there he was, in the doorway, watching. "Need help?" he asked, voice low. "I'm fine." But my hand was shaking as I rinsed the plates. "I shouldn't have given you that necklace," he said quietly. "Then why did you—" He didn't answer right away. "Because I wanted you to know someone saw you, all of you. It was a mistake." He stepped forward close enough to whisper. "Then why are you wearing it?" I froze. My hand moved instinctively to my neck, only to find the chain exposed just beneath my collar. No one was supposed to see it. Not even me. I backed away. "You need to go," I whispered. "Now." He looked at me for a long second, then nodded. "Tell me to stop, and I will, forever." I didn't say anything, so he walked away. And once again, I watched a boundary redraw itself, just a little further than before. Later that night, lying next to my husband's steady breathing, I realized something chilling. We weren't just playing a game anymore. The rules were disappearing, and I wasn't sure which scared me more, that I didn't want to stop, or that he didn't either. The days that followed were colder. Not in weather. Spring had begun to bloom outside, but in something between us. Me and my husband. Me and Liam. Me and myself. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. And I realized we hadn't needed to speak the words aloud. The rules had already changed. We were playing by a new unwritten code now. A code of glances and silences. of half smiles and unspoken guilt, of boundaries quietly erased by time and want. My husband became unusually attentive. He brought flowers home, yellow tulips my favorite. He started asking me questions again. Real ones. Are you happy? It hit me like a punch in the stomach. Because how do you answer that when the question comes not out of suspicion, but love? I wanted to be. I should have been. But I couldn't lie, not entirely. I'm tired, I told him. He wrapped his arms around me that night in a way he hadn't for months, and I clung to him, but not for the reasons he thought. Liam stayed away, physically at least, but his absence had a shape. I could feel it sitting across the dinner table. I could hear it in the way my son laughed when they played Xbox without him now. I told myself it was for the best, that it would fade whatever we almost had. But one night I found a card in my mailbox. No name, no message, just a quote printed in clean slanted font. We are not punished for our sins, but by them, Elbert Hubbard. I looked around the empty street. Nothing. No cars idling, no figures in the dark. Just the whisper of consequence. I kept the card. The next week, my son came home excited. Liam's back. He's gonna help me with my college essay. I nodded too quickly. That's great. He's always been good with words. And he was. Dangerously good. That afternoon, they worked at the dining room table. I stayed in the kitchen pretending to organize the spice rack. Every now and then I'd hear his voice. Deep, calm, familiar. And my breath would catch in my chest like I was back in that hallway. Back when the lights went out and nothing was supposed to happen. Until it did. When my son went upstairs to get his laptop charger, Liam followed me into the kitchen. He stood by the counter. Not too close, not far enough. I missed this house, he said. It missed you. The words slipped out before I could stop them. He smiled, sad and warm. I didn't mean to complicate things. You didn't, I lied. Tell me to stay away. His voice was almost pleading. But I didn't. And that was enough. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept looking at my husband's hand, resting inches from mine. Solid, faithful, familiar. But the heat I felt came from another memory. One I couldn't smother, no matter how tightly I pulled the covers over it. The next morning, I got another card. This one had no quote. Just 3 words, handwritten in the middle. Tell me when. No signature. But I didn't need one. I held the card to my chest and closed my eyes. And I whispered something I didn't know if I meant. Not yet. Because I wasn't ready to stop. And I wasn't ready to lose. But above all, I wasn't ready to admit that I had already begun to choose. My husband had a habit of reading the newspaper over breakfast, the way some people scroll through their phones. Silent, absorbed, detached. He never looked up when I brought his coffee. Not unless the headline screamed something tragic or scandalous. But that morning, he looked up, right at me, and something in his eyes lingered just a moment too long. You okay? He asked, casually flipping to the sports section. I nodded too quickly. Yeah, just didn't sleep well. And it was true. But it wasn't because of insomnia. It was because of a dream. Or maybe a memory. Or maybe the two had begun to blur. In it, I was sitting in that same kitchen chair. Liam leaned across the counter, his fingers brushing mine. And that same heat, that same electricity, pulsed through me like a current waiting for a fuse to blow. After breakfast, my husband left for work early. I stood at the window and watched his car disappear down the street. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Liam, he's gone, isn't he? I didn't respond. But I didn't delete the message either. That meant something. At 2 p.m., the doorbell rang. I knew it was him, even before I opened it. He stood there, not with flowers, not with excuses, but with a look. The same one from the hallway that night. The one that said, you don't have to lie anymore. Can I come in? I hesitated. It wasn't hesitation of should I let him in. It was, am I strong enough to keep him out? I stepped aside. He walked in, and that small sound, the click of the door closing behind him, was louder than any thunder I'd ever heard. We didn't speak for a while. He sat on the couch. I stood by the kitchen island. The space between us was both a chasm and a magnet. I know what this is, he finally said. Do you? I whispered. Yeah, it's wrong, it's stupid, it's messy, and I can't stop thinking about it. My hands trembled as I picked at the hem of my sweater. I don't know who I am when I'm with you, I admitted. Maybe that's the point, he said. Maybe with me, you don't have to be someone else's idea of perfect. That broke something in me. Because he saw me, not the wife, not the mother, not the woman behind the dinner plates and folded laundry. Just me. And I hated how much I craved that. He didn't try to kiss me. Not then. But he stood up, walked toward me slowly, and paused only inches away. "I'll go," he said. "But if you ask me to stay, I will. No questions, no expectations." He was giving me the out, the line in the sand. But he knew just like I did. We had already crossed it. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. Because when his hand brushed mine again like it did that night, I didn't pull away. That evening, my son came home. I made dinner like always, set the table, poured the wine. My husband joked about his day at work. My son laughed at something on his phone, and I sat there nodding, smiling, chewing. But I wasn't tasting anything, because just hours earlier, I had broken something sacred, and I didn't feel guilty. I felt alive, and that terrified me more than anything else. It's a strange thing how quickly a forbidden act can become a routine. 1 week passed, then 2, and suddenly Liam and I had created a new language. One that lived in the spaces between our words, in the silences during family dinners, in the lingering glances across the yard. He knew when to text. I knew when to delete. He knew which door creaked too loudly. I knew which lights not to turn on. What started as a game of resistance had morphed into a ritual, like sneaking glances during church, like slipping away during commercials, like brushing fingers when no one was watching. But someone always watches, and someone always knows. One afternoon, my son came home earlier than usual. I wasn't expecting him. Neither was Liam. He had dropped by to return a ladder, which we both knew was a lie. We stood in the garage closer than we should have been. Too close. "Hey," my son said, catching us mid-laugh. "What's so funny?" My heart thudded so hard, I thought it would burst through my ribs. "Oh, just something stupid," Liam said quickly. "You had to be there." And in that instant, I saw it. Suspicion, fleeting but sharp like the glint of a blade. My son's eyes flicked between us. I knew that look. I had worn it before. Years ago. When I caught my mother crying in the laundry room with a neighbor's husband standing too close. History repeats itself in the quietest ways. That night, I couldn't sleep. My husband snored beside me, blissfully unaware. I stared at the ceiling, counting the shadows, wondering where this would end. Not if where. Would it be a crash, a confession, or worse, a discovery? And why? Why did I want it to be found out? Why was a part of me screaming to be seen? The next day, I told Liam to stop coming by, to stop texting, to stop being near. "If we don't end it now, it'll end us both," I said. He nodded. Didn't argue? Didn't fight. Just stared at me for a long moment. "You say that like it hasn't already." And with that, he walked away. But endings, I've learned, are rarely clean. They're messy, jagged. They leave splinters behind. Because 2 nights later, I went looking for him. I didn't knock. I didn't wait. I just opened the door, and there he was, sitting alone, holding a photo of all of us from last summer, smiling like we were a family, like everything was fine. He didn't say anything when I stepped in. He didn't have to, because some rules don't just disappear. They get rewritten, and we were still playing. Only now the game didn't have winners, only secrets. And we were running out of places to hide them. There's a moment always when you realize you've gone too far. For me, it came on a Sunday afternoon, one of those painfully perfect days, when the sky is too blue and your conscience too loud. We were at my in-laws, a backyard barbecue, burgers, laughter, iced tea, the kind of scene you frame on a wall and call home. Liam was there. Of course he was. He stood across the yard helping my husband light the grill wearing that same old baseball cap he always wore backward. And for a second, it felt normal. Too normal. Until our eyes met. Too long. Too familiar. Too damn charged. I quickly looked away, but not before my sister-in-law noticed. "You two sure are close," she said later, tossing it out like a joke. I laughed too quickly, too hard. What, Liam? He's like a brother. She sipped her drink, her eyes sharp and unreadable. Sure doesn't look that way. Her words stuck to my ribs like wet fabric. That night, I replayed every glance, every smile, every sentence that might have lingered too long or traveled the wrong way. The weight of every moment we thought was private suddenly felt exposed. The secrecy had been thrilling, but now it felt like poison, because secrets rot when they're kept too long. I began to pull back, not out of virtue, but fear. No more late-night walks to his porch. No more laughing texts that lived too long on my screen. No more letting my imagination run wild every time he looked at me like I was more than someone's wife. I started showing up more in my marriage. Planning dinners, saying I love you more, touching my husband's hand when I didn't mean it but wished I could. Because if I couldn't erase what had happened, maybe I could bury it beneath good behavior. Maybe I could play normal so well, even I would start to believe it. But Liam didn't let me off the hook. One afternoon while helping with yard work, he whispered as he passed behind me, "You can pretend all you want, but you still look for me." I dropped the clippers in my hand like they'd burned me. "Stop," I hissed. "Don't do this here." "Where then?" he asked. "In my house, in your head." His words curled into my ears like smoke. I didn't answer him. I couldn't. Because he wasn't wrong. Even when I wasn't touching him, I was choosing him. Every time I turned away from my husband, every time I edited a memory to make myself feel cleaner, every time I swallowed a truth too ugly to confess. Later that week, I saw my son again. He hugged me tighter than usual. "You okay, Mom?" he asked, looking right into me. And I realized he knew, or he suspected. And what scared me most was that he still chose to hug me anyway. Somehow that made the shame worse, because it meant someone still saw me as good, even when I knew I wasn't. Even when I knew the game we played no longer had rules, only consequences, and they were catching up fast. It started like any other evening, except it wasn't. Because every second since Liam had whispered those words in my yard, I'd felt something building. Not between us. That was already lit. But inside me. Like a wave I'd been holding back for too long, and now it was dragging everything in its path. My son Derek had gone out with friends. My husband had fallen asleep early as usual. TV humming a glass of whiskey, half finished beside him. And me? I stood in the kitchen hands, trembling over a mug I didn't want. Staring at the clock like it was counting down to something I couldn't name. I should have gone to bed. I should have pretended to be tired, kissed my husband's cheek, closed the door, and held on to the last shred of whatever normalcy we had left. But I didn't. I went to Liam's house instead. He didn't act surprised when he opened the door. No smirk, no question. Just a look like he'd been expecting this since the beginning. "It's late," he said softly, stepping aside. "I know," I whispered. We stood in silence for a beat, the air between us heavy pulsing. "Is your husband asleep?" I didn't answer. He already knew. I walked past him into the living room where everything looked too familiar. My son had sat on that couch 1,000 times. I'd brought snacks over for them, joked with them, trusted them. And now I was here, breaking everything. "This is wrong," I said. "Then why are you still here?" he asked. I looked at him, really looked. He wasn't just my son's friend anymore. He was the man who held pieces of me that I had never meant to give away. Pieces I didn't even know were missing until he touched them without ever laying a finger on me. And now standing there, I couldn't run from it. "Because I don't want to lie anymore," I whispered. He stepped closer. "Then don't." We didn't kiss. Not that night. It wasn't about that. It was worse. We sat there in the dim light of the room and talked. Really talked. Not in secret code. Not with half-meant phrases or glances. He told me he had loved me long before I noticed. That every time I showed up at the house, I made him feel seen in a way no one else ever had. He said he hated himself for it, but not enough to walk away. And I cried, because I felt the same. And I hated that too. It was almost 1 a.m. when my phone buzzed. A text. From Derek. "Home soon. You still awake?" My breath caught. I stood up too fast. The room spun. "I have to go," I said. Liam stood too, hands in his pockets, eyes sad but knowing. "He doesn't know." "No, but he will if I'm not careful." I slipped out the back door and walked across the street, heart pounding louder than the sound of my keys shaking in my hand. I got home seconds before Derek did. I was in the kitchen when he walked in. He looked tired but happy. He smiled and hugged me. And I hugged him back tighter than I should have. Because I'd almost broken everything. And maybe I still would. Because I knew something now. Some games never end, they just change the rules. The next morning, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror toothbrush, still in my hand, barely moving. I wasn't really looking at myself. I was looking through myself. Something about guilt it doesn't shout. It whispers. It doesn't show up in explosions or affairs or fights. It shows up in your reflection, asking, "Are you still the same person you were yesterday?" And that morning, I couldn't lie to the woman in the mirror anymore. Derek was humming in the kitchen. Mark, my husband, was out front watering the lawn. Liam was across the street, probably pretending nothing had changed. But everything had. The air felt different. The coffee tasted bitter. Even the sunlight seemed too loud, too revealing. "You look pale," Mark said when I walked out. "Didn't sleep well," I replied. It was the truth, just not the full truth. At lunch, Derek invited Liam over again. I froze. "You okay with that, Mom?" I blinked too long before answering. "Of course," because what else could I say? "No, you can't invite your best friend, the one I almost gave my soul to last night." Liam came over wearing the same effortless charm, but he didn't meet my eyes. Not really. He joked with Derek, teased me about my cooking, even helped Mark fix the garage door. He played the part perfectly. Too perfectly. But the cracks were there, in little glances. In the way his hand brushed mine too long when passing a dish. In how he lingered in the doorway when everyone else moved on. He didn't need to say anything. I could feel him saying, "Do you regret last night?" And the worst part, I didn't. Later that evening, I caught Mark staring at me. Not in the usual way, not with love, with suspicion. "Everything all right?" he asked. Of course I smiled. Why wouldn't it be? But my smile didn't reach my eyes. And his didn't believe me. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room. The house was quiet, but inside me everything was screaming. I picked up my phone, typed a message to Liam, deleted it, typed it again. "We can't keep doing this." I didn't send it. Because I didn't know what this even was anymore. A mistake, a longing. A slow collapse into something I'd never be able to explain. I looked around at the house we'd built. The wedding photo on the mantle. Derek's childhood drawings still pinned to the fridge. And I whispered to no one, "I'm breaking everything, and they don't even know it yet." But the mirror from that morning came back to me. And the woman in it, she wasn't innocent anymore. She was a stranger. One who had played a game without knowing how high the stakes really were. And now, the mirror had cracked. It was a Tuesday, ordinary in every way, except nothing felt ordinary anymore. Mark had gone to work early. Derek was still sleeping in. And I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my untouched coffee, waiting for something. Maybe for time to reverse. Or for guilt to dissolve in the rising steam. But it didn't, because time doesn't go backward. And guilt, it only grows legs and walks behind you like a shadow. At exactly 9:02 a.m., there was a knock on the door. I didn't need to look. I already knew. Liam, when I opened it, he didn't smile. His eyes held that same storm from the night of the game. "We need to talk," he said softly. I nodded, but this time, I didn't let him in. We sat on the front steps, not touching, not even close. Just talking. Just being two people with hearts full of landmines. "I didn't sleep," he confessed. Me either. I thought I could pretend it didn't happen. That we could go back to before. "We can't," I said. "The rules are gone." Silence. "I didn't plan for this," he whispered. Neither did I. But we had played the game anyway. That's the thing with temptation. It never knocks when you're ready. It barges in when you're weak, when you're lonely. When life hands you an empty chair and someone else decides to sit there. I should have stopped it, but I didn't. He should have walked away, but he didn't. And now we were here, sitting in the aftermath. "What do we do now?" he asked. "We disappear," I said. He looked up. Disappear? From this, from what we almost became. Almost. I felt his words burn through me. "It wasn't just almost," he said. "You know it." He wasn't wrong. But I also knew this wasn't a romance. It wasn't a love story. It was a fracture. In a home, in a trust, in myself. "You're my son's best friend," I said quietly. "And you're my best mistake," he replied. That hurt more than it should have. When he finally stood, I didn't. I stayed sitting watching him walk away. And this time, he didn't look back. Later, Derek came down for breakfast. "Hey, was that Liam's car?" "Yeah," I said. "He just stopped by." "Everything okay?" I smiled. "Just tying up loose ends." And then I walked to the sink, dumped my cold coffee down the drain, and finally breathed. Because sometimes survival means choosing silence over stories. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is end the game. Before someone else loses more than you ever meant to gamble. I used to think secrets were heavy, that they'd press on your chest until you couldn't breathe. But the truth is, some secrets become part of you. Like an old scar, you don't notice it every day, but when you touch it, it stings just enough to remind you it's still there. That's what Liam became. Not a man, not a memory, but a mark. Months passed. Life resumed its routine. Mark and I argued less, but laughed less too. Derek finished school and moved out. He never brought up Liam again. It was like life had hit the reset button. Only I knew better. I carried the glitch. I saw Liam one more time, accidentally. A grocery store aisle, a box of cereal between us. He looked older somehow, and I suppose I did too. We both smiled politely. "Hey," he said. "Hey," that was all. No one in the store knew. No one could have guessed that two people staring at a box of granola once undid the rules of a whole family. "You look good," he added quieter this time. "So do you." A pause. Still playing games, he asked, that same half-smile on his lips. I shook my head. "No, I lost my taste for them." He nodded, and just like before, he walked away. I stood there for a moment longer, the cereal box still in my hand. Then I placed it back on the shelf, because I knew I didn't need sweetness to cover up bitterness. That night I sat in my backyard, alone, no wine, no music, just me and the cool breeze of a life not entirely shattered, but certainly changed. There was no dramatic ending, no confrontation, no confession. Only this quiet truth. Some stories don't ask to be told, they ask to be buried. But I'm telling you now, because someone somewhere is about to sit too close during a game that should have stayed innocent. And maybe if they hear my story, they'll remember what I forgot. Some rules aren't made to be bent. They're made to protect the pieces of us we can't afford to lose.